All right, Matt, we got to make this quick. I don't have time for this meeting. So what do you got for your dumb podcast idea?
All right, picture this. So we get a guy who he is just this dark-haired, swarthy, handsome fella, and we throw him into this show with this other guy who looks scroungy, weird, and is a little off-putting, but he has that level of energy. You put these two together, and then they talk about, get this, television shows, and not just any TV shows, 90% Mike Schur shows or the Muppets. And that's pretty much it. And they just go back and forth. Already, I've got interest from the guy who does that movies podcast. He's interested in it.
Terrence?
No, the other guy, the less cool one.
All right, and that's a bit of a blow, but so
I know.
What would you call this podcast?
I've got the perfect name. Hey everyone, welcome to TV Guys. I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And I'm sorry that I'm not Terrence. That's the only time I'll ever say that. I'm only sorry that I'm not him like 2 times in a year.
What's the other time?
Christmas.
Christmas? Why Christmas?
I don't know. I didn't think through it. I don't have actual reasoning for the numbers I put. Gosh, you act like I know these things. I just say stuff and hopefully it sticks.
Yeah.
Hey, speaking of saying stuff and hopefully it sticks, next week I've been meaning to promo this, but it has like completely snuck up on both you and I. So I want everyone to know right away before we jump into anything, we're doing something special next week. We are doing a Facebook Live on our page for the episode. So the episode is not going to be pre-recorded. It's not going to be in the can. You're going to see us on here, and we are going to invite you guys, jump on in, give your feedback, let us know. We're going to talk about just, in general stuff. We're going to talk about TV shows that we're watching. We want to hear shows you're watching, give us recommendations, or tell us, hey, I like that show that you're watching now. Stuff like that.
Yeah. I have no idea how the mechanics of Facebook Live will work, but Matt says he does. So I guess we're trusting Matt nowadays.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, I said
dangerous.
I mean, you're the one who hosts our whole podcast, and like the reason people can listen to it is because of you. I edit it and send it to you privately, but that's about it.
That's true. And now you know whose role is what on this show. So there you go.
Well, I do have the power because I mean, I'll send you the episodes, and okay. How often do you even press play and listen at all before you just post it?
I definitely do not listen to it all.
I know.
I'll listen to like half. But yeah.
Okay.
And that's being generous.
It means you listen to because if I'm going to do anything special, it's just going to be for the intro.
Yeah, that's true. But like I'll make it past the intro. I'll listen to like 10 minutes into it and I'll be like, oh yeah, I remember us saying that sort of stuff. But I've got so many shows. So next week when we do our live, I'll tell you like all the shows I'm watching. I've just been like going gung-ho with these TV shows. A bunch of new things that I'm putting on my plate here.
Nice.
Yeah.
So Matt, why don't you tell them what we're doing today?
Today, not next week, we are talking about TV showrunners. And so these are the guys who created a show. They're the in charge. If for a TV show, it's pretty much the director of the show. Now, each show, don't be confused, each individual episode has a director, but there is the guy or the girl who is making sure everything is running smooth, who has the concept often of the show, who is like, they are the face of it in all of the creative sides. So we're talking about who these showrunners are and some of the best ones in TV today.
I think this is the perfect time to do this podcast too, because with the resurgence, it's become such a thing. The Office Ladies podcast really blazed the trail of actors podcasting about the shows that they were on. There's so many of them that are on now. The Office, Parks and Rec, Gilmore Girls, New Girl, like they all have ones like this. And with that, we get to hear about behind the scenes and who really goes into making all these decisions. And I love hearing all this stuff. I'm a behind the scenes nerd. So that's kind of cool. And so now like some of these names that maybe you and I who have been nerds all along knew about are becoming more into the public light.
It was me. I was the nerd all along. Ha ha ha. we got a shout out from one of our fans who listens, Andrew. We've had him on the show a couple times before. It's been a little bit, so Andrew will have to have you back sometime. But he was just messaging me this week and talking about how he listens now to like the Rewatch podcast for Psych, and he listens to, of course, the New Girl one as well that he's been listening to. So as long as you're not cheating on us, Andrew, that's fine. Listen to whatever podcast you want, but we know we're your main simp here.
You don't have to listen to only us. We're like a poly podcast. That's our style.
It feels weird. It feels weird what you just said.
That's why I said it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Sometimes I'll say things just to get a reaction out of Matt.
Oh, weird. I've never done that in anything. Never done that in any of my podcasts or friendships or anything like that. Crazy that you would. Hey, go ahead.
I have a few that I know that you'll talk about and a couple that I think you won't talk about. So I don't know who you want to start with.
You know, I've got a lot on here, and there's some that's like we don't have to go into in depth with. I also wanted to highlight too, when I talk about showrunners, there is such overlap in showrunners versus co-creators versus executive producers, because they have that input on the creative side, but they might not be the guy. So, for instance, one of the ones that I have to talk about, he's just coming onto the scene in terms of television work, and that's Jon Favreau. Mm-hmm. He's been involved in Hollywood for a long time. He's been on TV and been doing some creative stuff on TV for a while, but really he's become almost the Kevin Feige of the Star Wars TV series shows, that he's been a huge part of creating this Star Wars universe on the television screen, because he is the showrunner for Mandalorian, but he plays a big part. He was a executive producer for Book of Boba Fett, executive producer for Ahsoka, and a number of other shows as well that he has been.
Is he behind Obi-Wan, or is that somebody else?
I don't think he has any involvement with Obi-Wan, though. I was looking at it, I didn't see his name pop up for anything.
Okay.
Which I was just surprised about. I'm like, oh, well, got him for like even like I think it was Rebels, or not Rebels. One of the like animated ones. I was like, oh, I wouldn't expect him to be in that. So he was one I wanted to bring up that I'm excited to see more out of this Star Wars universe, because it was really good start that we have. And we talked about this in our Book of Boba Fett episode. There's a lot of areas that they can go. There's a lot of storylines that they can explore and time frames they can explore. So I'm interested to see where they're going to go.
Okay. One of the ones that I wanted to talk about, Dan Harmon.
Dan Harmon. Okay.
So Dan Harmon.
Weirdly, I didn't think of putting him on here, but you're right. He's a big guy.
Dan Harmon. So his two biggest shows, obviously, are Community and Rick and Morty. Which, okay, I can't really speak to the Rick and Morty of it all. I haven't seen that show. Have you, Matt?
I've watched about half of the first season, and it was like, oh, this is a bit much for me. Like, the comedy is smart, but it really dives into just very absurd and very nihilistic. And I'm like, that's not my thing.
Yeah, I don't know. And I don't think that Dan Harmon is someone I would enjoy hanging out with in person. Because he seems to be very like, well, I don't care. It's got to be my way or the highway. Like, I'm so smart. Like, he kind of has that arrogance to him, what it sounds like. But I do have to give him credit. He did make great TV with Community. And even with some of the stuff he was so stubborn on, like I know so many times with the music cues we've talked about, I think he's gone into his own budget to get like big music cues, be able to play in the show, because he would rather do that than use something that was cheaper.
Yeah, I get it. He's also one of those that, like, this is another reason why he's gotten so big, is he's got a really good tried and true method for any episode that he does. He's got what he calls like this story circle, and he really adheres to that so much, where it's like it starts off with you establish right away in this episode. This all happens in 30-minute episodes too, where it's like you start off right away, you establish the familiarity of a character in some sort of zone of comfort, then they desire something, then they enter into an unfamiliar situation, then they adapt the situation, then they get what they wanted, then they pay a heavy price for it, then they return to the familiar situation, and they've returned as a change because of that journey. It's like, that makes sense. That's a great story structure, and it works for what he writes. But you know, that's his philosophy.
Yeah. All right. That's kind of all I had about Dan Harmon. Who do you got next?
Sure. So you talked about Dan and saying that you weren't like the biggest fan of all this stuff, even though Community was great. Here's someone that I'm not a fan of really at all, even though I've watched a number of their shows, and that's Shonda Rhimes. I know that her shows are like, I think the primary audience, especially in the recent years, has been women of color. But she does have very accessible shows. I know a lot of white people who like and love Grey's Anatomy. It's not just for people of color.
Yeah.
But she definitely, as a woman of color, she can speak to that a little bit more. So I think that might be a part of the disconnect, where it's like, some of this stuff doesn't lean my way. But she has this like huge list of shows. I talked about Grey's Anatomy, but that spun Private Practice. That also spun Station 19. I believe that Station 19 is a spinoff, another one of Grey's Anatomy. But then there's also Scandal. I think I watched the most of Scandal. I still watched like 6 or 7 seasons of Grey's Anatomy, but I watched, I think, all of Scandal.
And I've seen a little bit of How to Get Away with Murder as well.
Yep, that was on there. And then now she's jumped into actually streaming services. She had Bridgerton, was a pretty big show that debuted, I think, last year, maybe 2 years ago. And then recently on Netflix, she has the true story of Inventing Anna, if you've seen that.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting show. Again, it's not my cup of tea, but she is a massive talent, and there's no denying that she has pull, and that when she puts her name on something, it's probably going to get pretty big, and people are probably going to watch it just because it's her.
Yeah, for sure. And I think next to her, probably the biggest one we have on our list is the big elephant in the room, which is the big Mike Schur in the room.
Of course. Yeah, and we all know we've talked about him a lot. We've talked about how he wasn't the showrunner on Office, but he was a writer and co-executive producer on Office, but was showrunner for Parks and Rec and Good Place, co-creator for Brooklyn Nine-Nine. He actually was a producer. He started in I don't know if this was his first start, but early career was as a producer for the Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah,
I didn't know that until I was looking up some stuff about him. So he's been around for a while.
Yeah, I think he was the main guy behind the helm of Parks and Rec and The Good Place, but he said he wasn't the main guy for The Office, and I believe Dan Gore was more in charge of Brooklyn Nine-Nine than he was.
Yeah. I mean, and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, you can feel like Andy Samberg really come through too. He was definitely a big part of it. He's a producer, and you can feel like his comedy just really permeates, especially his character, but it really permeates the show.
Yeah, on a recent episode of Office Ladies, they were talking about the company picnic episode of The Office, and how they really wanted to get Mose to be like Dwight's guest at the company picnic. He's like, I'm in the middle of like directing a big Parks and Rec episode. Like I can't. And it's like, he just like, there is no way. So that's why we have that weird guy Rolf instead of Mose, because Mike Schur was just too busy. Because yeah, he actually has a life and like multiple careers that went on at the same time.
Yeah.
He didn't have the time to be Amish boy.
It's really funny because you said company picnic and my brain jumped to Beach Day, which I love that episode. Completely different season. It's like 2 seasons earlier. But man, I love Beach Day. I love the whole thing about Andy falling into the water. Mm-hmm. It's like, what are you doing, Andy? Angela's pretty simple. Look at what I'm doing and tell someone about it.
That was really awesome. Yeah. And then Parks and Rec too. So I think I've listening to the Parks and Rec podcast. They mentioned writers Mike Scully and Norm Hitchcock, and like that has to be where Hitchcock and Scully's names on Brooklyn Nine-Nine came from. It just has to. Yeah,
I'm sure it is. That's really funny. So Mike Schur is that guy. He's another one that you're gonna watch it because of him. Mm-hmm. There's some others I have on my list, but I think the only one that would be, I have Mike Schur from like maybe 10 years before that. So that the guy who was before him that was like the old Mike Schur was Chuck Lorre.
Yep, and we were bringing him up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he started on Roseanne. He started with Dharma and Greg, and those he was big on those. And then he got his own show when he started Two and a Half Men.
Yep, that was
And
his first big break.
yeah, that was so successful that I was able to move on and do Big Bang Theory. He also was a showrunner for Kominsky Method that was streaming for Netflix. But then he was a producer on like Young Sheldon, Mike and Molly. I don't think he was showrunner for Young Sheldon. I think he was just producer or co-creator. But Mike and Molly, Mom. I don't know if he was showrunner for Mom, but he was another big role in that. He has put out hit after hit, and it's again, some of that is are people just watching it just because it's him? Because I'm also sure there's a part of that.
Not to insult his shows, but his shows also have very like broad humor that's very accessible, and I think that and very episodic. Like you could pick up Big Bang Theory and any episode, and you won't miss a whole lot. And it's like whereas. Like Community, a lot of times it's very niche jokes, and you have like very callbacks to other episodes, and it's I can see the appeal of both, but it's just that's his area.
I understand why people might look down on shows that maybe Chuck Lorre does because, like as you said, when it's accessible to everyone, there is a little bit of a lowest common denominator type of humor that can be, and I think people like maybe they point to Big Bang Theory because I've heard people who make this argument. They're like, oh, but Big Bang Theory is so smart. I'm like, well, I mean, the comedy is fine, but it's written about smart people. It's like there's good jokes in it, but it definitely doesn't have, and I don't mean to disparage him or the writers at all, but it definitely doesn't have that same wit that say Community or like an Arrested Development has. Those have really smart jokes, in my opinion.
The problem is like, well, not problem, but it's about smart things. Like the guys on Big Bang Theory are all super geniuses, and a lot of times, like the math and the science, they have actual science consultants who make sure that a lot of the stuff checks out. But that's not like the crux of the joke. You don't have to understand physics to get the jokes.
Yeah, they do a pretty good job of saying it with their lingo, but from context, you completely understand what the joke is that they're making.
Yeah. One thing I think this might be a Chuck Lorre thing, is, it's a thing, Friends did it a lot of times where after a while, someone's got to have a baby, and then there's a baby on the show, which adds more complications. So Howard and Bernadette ended up having 2 kids by the end of the show. We never actually see either of the kids. We hear them crying or yelling off screen at one point, and I think you might see him pushing a stroller at one point, but they never hired any infant actors.
That should not be a term. I just want to point that out. Infant actors. No, they're just infants. They're too young to have any sort of designation of this is what you're doing.
I know, like, at what point were the Olsen twins acting in Full House?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the first 3 seasons or so, it's like they're just there, and you work around them.
Yeah. Well, even then, like that's one of the famous. The reason they had 2 of them was because of the labor laws and how often you could have infants filming. So like they had to switch them out, and it's just like Chuck Lorre's like, I'm not going to deal with that nonsense. They're just not going to be off screen.
Yeah. Yep. And I completely understand that. Completely understand. All right. I think that was me throwing that out there. So why don't you go ahead and go?
One that I have, and that I know Matt's not going to have a whole lot to say about, is Amy Sherman Palladino, who was behind Gilmore Girls and Bunheads, and now The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Okay.
And from what I hear about her, it sounds like she'd be a nightmare to work with, but everybody has positive things to say about her. It's like, in college, sometimes they say that the best professors are the ones where their classes are hard, but the students love them. And so like it's that mix, because I've heard it on Gilmore Girls, like there was no collaboration, there's no improv. Like if you said cannot when it should be can't, then you have to do it over again to get the words absolutely word perfect, which sounds exhausting. Really? Yeah. They even had George Anthony Bell, who might know, he was the principal on Even Stevens. His job on Gilmore Girls was to like run the lines with the actors and like help them get a word perfect, like be like the script coach for them. And I guess Scott Patterson, who played Luke, said he fought for them to keep him because he's like, we can't do the show without this guy.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, when they came through with the revival, so on Gilmore Girls, they did 6 seasons with her, and then there was contract disputes, and then they were let go, and they had a different showrunner for the last season. when they came back for the revival, like 9 years later, pretty much everyone in the cast said, I'll do it if Amy's in charge. And so for them to all have that respect and that loyalty, and I forget if it was Jared Padalecki or Milo Ventimiglia who said something like, yeah, I would love to come and speak your words again. It's like they all had, I mean, the whole word perfect thing sounds like a nightmare, but the fact that everybody was like, absolutely, she's in charge of this thing.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
And it completely makes sense because if you've watched any of her shows read like plays. And it's like Shakespeare himself had iambic pentameter that he stuck to, and that's pretty much like a rhythm. And so when you're writing and you're writing with the rhythm, there's not room for improvisation. And so that's where I do have to give her credit behind like Gilmore. Even though I dislike Gilmore Girls, I have to give her credit because that writing is really solid. It's very fast paced. It's very boom, boom, boom. And it knows when the beats are. It doesn't mean like they always are talking and they never stop, but it knows when to stop. And that like when you're playing music and you have rests in there, the rests should mean something. You should feel the rest because you should feel when there's silence. And so that's what having that sort of a beat, if you will, to her words, that's what it does, is that when there's those beats and those moments where you're not talking, that it makes it stand out, and it's very intentional. So I do have to give credit. I completely understand where she's coming from because it is a very specific style that doesn't allow for the improvisation of actors. But I didn't know that, though. That's interesting.
Yeah. And it's crazy because you listen to like Parks and Rec and in The Office, those podcasts, like they were like, yeah, I came up with this on the day, and that was just such a Steve Carell thing. It's like, you know, those guys would be like shackled if they were in an Amy Sherman Palladino show.
Yeah. And it's not to say like those shows don't have rhythm either, because they absolutely do, but there is that room for improvisation, and that in the editing room, they can decide, okay, this doesn't work. This is what we're going to pull out, and we're going to make the rhythm and we're going to piece it together instead of writing that rhythm to be there to begin with.
Well, then those shows like The Office, like the actors had so much more clout after a while. Are you caught up to date on the Office Ladies podcast?
You say that like I listen to it a lot.
Okay, well, never mind. Well, there's a recent episode, I guess, a runner of the episode where Jim and Pam are off on their honeymoon. They've actually filmed it, and they made it all the way almost to editing. There was going to be a scene where, you know, the famous painting that of the office that Pam did is like the last shot they show of the final series. Erin like destroyed it on accident. She was trying to clean it and like made all the colors run, and it was like basically just like accidentally completely destroyed it. And Jenna Fisher was like fighting like everybody, the writers, the editors, the producers, like, this cannot happen. You cannot destroy Pam's painting. Like it can, like, it was filmed, and I guess Paul Lieberstein, who played Toby, was like, no, I love it. It's great. It's going to be in the episode. And then, like, at the very last second, it was cut. And so that's why there's a couple episodes where that is painting is missing, because they were still filming and they were deciding if they were going to cut that out or not. Ended up being cut out of the show, which I think is for the better. But it's crazy how like Jenna Fisher basically spearheaded like, you can't destroy Pam's painting.
And I totally get that. I did actually see a reference to that in like an article. I didn't like get into it because you know how articles are written nowadays. You click on it, it's like, oh, here's the 90 ads that are going to overwhelm your screen first.
Yeah.
But I saw like that headline, and I'm like, oh, that makes sense that she'd fight for it, because that was a heart of like, that was one of the best her and Michael moments that they had in the show. It was like when Michael showed that he was the one who really got her in the office, apart from Jim, of course. But Jim wasn't in the picture in season 3. He was in Stanford at that time. So Michael saw what no one else in the office was willing to take a moment to see, and that's why it was such a big deal for her character. And when you're so protective over your character that you've been playing for years, that makes complete sense. That's like a piece of her.
Yeah, I think it's also important for Michael just on his own, because it shows, you know, Michael could be so like pinheaded and offensive sometimes, but really that shows that he really did care, because there was not a business mind or a sales thing that he bought that painting. He bought it just because he literally cared about Pam and liked the painting.
Yeah, and that was, if you don't remember when you're watching it, that episode was the one where he brought, where Ryan brought him to business school, and then he finds out that Ryan's been bad-mouthing his company, and he takes it so personally because, of course, he doesn't view it as a company. He views like Ryan bashing him, and him as the dad of the work family, so to speak, and that Ryan just completely misses the point and doesn't understand what the idea of that office is in Michael's view. And so both Michael and Pam are able to get different things out of that moment. It's why it's written so well, is they're both able to get something out of that moment, but that they're able to bond in it too. I completely agree with Jenna Fisher.
Yeah,
I'm glad they kept it.
You know, and while we're on The Office, I know I just had my last pick, but I think we can't not mention Greg Daniels, who really is the spearhead of The Office, I think.
Yeah. And he was, what else was he?
He was on The Simpsons and did King of the Hill. He did a lot of animated.
King of the Hill, that's right. I was thinking. Was he showrunner for King of the Hill? No, I think co-created.
I think he was. He probably was for at least a little bit of it. I know he was for a while with The Simpsons too.
Yeah, he co-created Parks and Rec, co-created King of the Hill. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Greg Daniels is a big deal. So let's jump into this because this ties off of that when you're talking about him and then The Simpsons. I had Matt Groening on here because Matt Groening was like, he doesn't have the wealth of shows that I named off for like Chuck Lorre or even for Mike Schur. But the ones that he had two back to back that were really good. Like Futurama was so good that even though it got canceled, it kept coming back. It's like one of those shows you couldn't kill. In fact, it is coming back again. It got canceled like 3 or 4 times and it's like, nope, it's not going to stay dead because Matt Groening has that much power.
And we are getting John DiMaggio back as Bender.
We are. Yeah. Say what you will about The Simpsons now, like where it is now. It is definitely, I don't think that there's any other animated show that is more influential than The Simpsons.
No, for sure.
I think that it's like top tier for influential for shows, period. But it absolutely defined a generation. It like made satire and tongue-in-cheek humor. I don't know if it ever stopped being popular, but it kept it popular. It helped to give new things to that sort of humor. At the same time, it created this whole new genre of cartoons that were accessible for adults and for an older humor. And then, of course, not to mention how long-standing it's been and how iconic these characters are, and then go to Futurama. And now he has a new show as well that I haven't gotten to watch yet, but it's called Disenchantment, and it's already 4 seasons in. So, I mean, that's successful in and of itself. 4 seasons of the show, you got it.
Yeah. We're talking about some of these guys, like, Greg Daniels co-created Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but then kind of gave the reins to Mike Schur. Mike Schur helped co-create Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but then Dan Gore kind of took the reins there. One more one that I want to talk about, I keep going all the way back, and of course I'm going to talk about is Jim Henson in charge of The Muppet Show way back in the day. Because that show, I mean, I won't talk a lot about it, but, in the first season, it was not as well known as it became, and they were filming in London. So it was kind of like pulling teeth to get celebrities to want to go film for a week in London for this unknown puppet show. So the first season was kind of like whoever they could get. And by the end of the 5th season, like every celebrity, it was like a badge of honor. Like, I did the Muppet Show, I've arrived. And they only ended it because of Jim Henson wanted to do other things. Like there was talks about it being kind of like a Saturday Night Live, where it just keeps going and going and going with like different celebrities in and out. Like there could potentially have been a world where we still have the Muppet Show on today.
That's really funny that I didn't see. Like, I know how much of a Muppet fan you are, and I still didn't see you with this coming. You bringing it up. That's why I laughed to myself. Like, oh, of course, yeah.
But the reason I wanted to bring that up with the whole, letting other people run it is that's kind of what Jim Henson did with Fraggle Rock in the 80s. He was absolutely instrumental in writing and producing and coming up with the concept and casting and like everything getting off the ground. But, Jim Henson he has 2 characters in Fraggle Rock, and they're both like recurring characters. They're none of the main Fraggles. And that's because Jim Henson wanted to be off doing other things. He didn't want to be stuck in Toronto every week filming the show. Because we have some of his other longtime performers who'd performed with the Muppets and Sesame Street. Some of those core guys are there filming Fraggle Rock, and he could come in every now and then and direct or perform his characters and then leave again and like leave that machine running.
Yeah. It's amazing to see when you look at some behind the scenes stuff. It's amazing to see like how relational all of entertainment is,
Mhm.
because it really is like the people that you know, and like you see these friend circles, and like, you know, we just talked about how much Mike Schur interacted with Greg Daniels and then interacted, like there's all these threads, and you see similar product like Norm Hiscock and like you see them use the same guys, and like you're starting to see that with this Star Wars universe. So we talked about the outside of the show, or the beginning of the show.
You know,
you've got these groups that they keep working together. Yeah.
So I've also been listening to Brian Baumgartner's new podcast. It's basically just him interviewing random celebrities. Like he did Dave Koechner, who played Todd Packer. He did Allison Hannigan from How I Met Your Mother, and it's kind of getting their stories. And he was talking to Eric Stonestreet, who you might know from Cam, who was Cam on Modern Family. And I guess when it came down to the final auditions for Kevin on The Office, it came down to Brian Baumgartner, Eric Stonestreet, and Jorge Garcia. It was going to be between one of those three guys. We're going to be Kevin on The Office.
They made the right pick with Brian Baumgartner for sure.
Yeah, I think so. And then
I love Jorge
Garcia. Yeah, both those guys ended up having like great careers too.
Yeah, I love Jorge Garcia. I just don't see him as Kevin.
No.
Well, let's talk about Jorge Garcia, because J.J. Abrams was on my list too. He was more of a classic showrunner too. And like when I say classic, I mean like now 20 some years ago. He got started with Felicity and Alias. And then he really hit it big. Like he got some clout from those shows, but he really hit it big when he launched Lost. Mm-hmm. And he was able to then, I think like he only did 4 showrunner shows. Unless he wasn't showrunner for Felicity. I can't remember right now off the top of my head.
Unless that was Joss Whedon.
Yeah.
No.
And that might, I don't know. I know that he was involved with it. I just don't know if he was the guy. But then he did Fringe after that, which a lot of people loved as well. I didn't ever really get into it. That wasn't my sort of show, but I can appreciate what it did, and I can appreciate the acting. But then like he still was involved in, like he did he was an executive producer on Person of Interest. He was an executive producer on a show that I love that I've brought up before, that miniseries 11/22/63 with James Franco on Hulu. But yeah, definitely it's like he did so much with Lost. He did so much. Talking about influential shows, he really changed the landscape of dramatic television when he brought out Lost. And again, that was another show that he handed over a lot more control to Carlton Cuse and Damon Lindelof.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was the guy that launched it, and it was a great show. I don't care what people say about where it went, still was a great show, even when it had its weak episodes. Loved it.
I would be surprised if we don't end up doing another episode of Lost at some point.
Yeah. I don't know what we'd do without it. We'd be missing. There you go. Yeah. I couldn't think of the right word, but that fits. That feels right. Missing. All right. What do you got?
One last one. I didn't think of till just now. We can't not mention Larry David, who obviously changed the game with sitcoms going into Seinfeld. Because it's just crazy the humor that they have and their mindset. Like it doesn't matter if it doesn't have anything to do with the story. If we find a funny joke or funny runner or funny dialogue, we're going to put it in. Yeah,
Larry David is a very unique talent. He is like, how do you describe him? He's like Twitter, you know, like he will just complain about anything and everything, but then it made for really good television because it was like there was no arcs. He didn't do arcs in Seinfeld. Maybe it was before that was even big, but still, like there are other shows where there'd be characters that would change over the time. These 4 never did. And I think that was even the point of the series finale, is to be like, look, they still are doing the same things that they've always done. And they kind of are a blight on society to be this type of person all the time. And it was a unique premise, a unique idea that just had some strong staying power. I've never watched a full episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, but I know a lot of people really appreciate it and enjoy it. It's got a following. So but it's another one of those weird shows where it's just like, it's so him, very much his humor.
Very much so. Yeah. I think that's all that I had off the top of my head. I'm looking through
You,
my list of like my
you
top
didn't
shows.
include. I'm sure you're counting on me to include these, but you didn't include Bill Lawrence.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm ashamed of myself that I forgot Bill Lawrence. That was one of the main ones that so I came up with this idea. I'm the one who came up with this idea for showrunners, and Bill Lawrence
You
was on my
did.
short list. And yikes.
Oh, this is embarrassing. Well, Bill Lawrence. So Bill Lawrence got his start on Spin City. And I didn't realize that until like recently. But he got his start in Spin City with Michael J. Fox. And he went from that and he was a showrunner for Scrubs, which both you and I absolutely love, and a showrunner now for Ted Lasso, which
Yep.
again, both you and I love. I don't know if he was showrunner or executive producer, but he was involved with Cougar Town as well.
Yeah,
That
he was
pretty
he was the
successful.
main guy in that too.
I thought
Yeah.
so.
And Cougar Town, while it's not great, was basically like a recasting call for Scrubs. So many Scrubs actors.
Yeah. I mean, they even brought like Courtney Cox from Cougar Town on to Scrubs for a
Yeah.
couple of episodes. They're able to pull
Yeah.
that. I'm trying
And
to
then-
think if we've seen like cameos in Ted Lasso from like any of his other shows, because I felt like there's like some that popped up.
Yeah, and on Cougar Town, Courtney Cox's dad, who's a recurring character, was played by Ken Jenkins, who played Dr. Kelso on Scrubs.
There you go.
And even, I think we've talked about this before, there's a little tag. So for a few episodes of Cougar Town, they ran into Sam Lloyd playing Ted again from Scrubs. It's his actual character, which that doesn't make sense because there's so many actors who are playing different characters, and they played with that. They were in the room, and he was talking to Krista Miller and Sarah Chalk, who are both different characters on Cougar Town, and talk about, everyone looked, and obviously they bring in all the recurring characters who are from Scrubs. He's like freaking out seeing everybody. And then they even bring in, like, he really freaks out when he sees Dr. Kelso as Dr. Courtney Cox's dad. And then all of a sudden, like, Zach Braff is the pizza guy. And then all of a sudden, the Todd is there as the pool cleaner. And it's just like a really funny gag just for Scrubs fans.
Good. I like that. So yes, as you can see, that when they like someone, they like to use these people again. They like to go off of these relationships they've built. Another one that I had that I thought you would bring up, but I guess he doesn't have like a ton. His big one is This Is Us, and that's Dan Fogelman. But he also was showrunner for Gallivant about 5 years ago, this musical that took place back in like medieval times. It was a crazy, weird concept that was very unique, but it ended up working pretty well. I liked Gallivant. It wasn't the best show I've ever seen, but it was solid. It was a nice response to Glee. And it should have probably gone longer than 2 seasons. But recently, he was executive producer on Only Murders in the Building with Steve Martin and Martin Short and Selena Gomez. And that was a pretty good show as well. So he was another one that I had on here. And then the final one that I have, and I don't watch his shows, but I have him on my list. But he's starting to blow up, is Taylor Sheridan. So Taylor Sheridan was a director who did like these modern westerns like Sicario, Hell or High Water, Wind River. They're really strong movies. They were all nominated for different Oscars. I don't know if Wind River was, but it was in that same vein. But now he's moved into television and he's creating some quality programming that people are loving, like Yellowstone and its prequel 1883. He's working on is now currently doing Mayor of Kingstown with Jeremy Renner. So he's got like these high profile shows that people are really loving and digging. I want to watch those shows eventually. I've heard Mayor of Kingstown might be a little much, a little dark, but I want to see Yellowstone in 1883.
I've seen the first episode of Yellowstone. It seems to be one of those shows where you have to be like intensely watching. You can't be watching in the background because you're missing what's going on.
Sure. So that was my list. I had more than I thought I would when I started out on this.
Yeah. So Matt, I got a question.
Yeah.
Way back, I know when we started our podcast, you reached out to me. You said, "Hey, I'd like to do this TV podcast as a spinoff to Movies on a Monday." Whose idea was Movies on a Monday? Was that you or Terrence?
It was Terrence's, where he wanted to do a show or he wanted to do a podcast to talk about movies. And then like from then it was like, well, this is what it'll look like. Well, that was more of a collaborative effort, but he definitely had the first idea for it. That's why I view him in that way, a little bit of like, he's the host, I'm the co-host.
Yeah. Because I was asking, because like if we get meta, then because obviously you're the connective tissue between the two podcasts. So even then, it's like how Greg Daniels passed the reins to Mike Schur, Terrence passed the reins to you for TV Guys.
There we go. Yep. And then I'll pass the reins to you for your new Muppet podcast you're going to do.
You know what? If I had a co-host and an audience, I would absolutely do that. So if enough people reach out and say, "Hey, I'll listen to that," then I'll do it. But like,
I picked movies and TV. Like, how much more basic can you get? Do you like entertainment in some form? Well, you will like this show.
Yeah. And, I think it might be inevitable. We might eventually do an episode on the Muppets, just despite people not wanting us to. But I mean, we don't have any immediate plans, but I'm not ruling it out.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. We did a Muppets episode for Movies on a Monday where it was like, we did, you take a movie and you keep one human character and then replace all the other characters with Muppets. And I loved that idea. That would be so much fun to even just do for TV. And anyone who's like, oh, I'm not a Muppet guy, that would still be a fun episode. You'd still enjoy being like, oh, that would be funny to see that happen.
Mm. Yeah. Also, so listeners, not to peel back the curtain a little bit, I was hanging out with my cousin Tammy, who also is friends with Matt, talking about the podcast, and she was saying, "Well, oh yeah, you should do a Gilmore Girls episode. I'll be on it." So I texted Matt and I said, "Hey, it's just if we ever do a Gilmore Girls episode, I have a co-host or a guest in mind, since you don't know that much about it." And Matt's response was, "It's like you hate me."
It is exactly like that. That's our relationship.
Yeah. So that could be coming at some point.
Oh man, I gave you so much crap last week. That was such a fun episode. I really enjoy mocking you, but at the same time, we build each other up too. It's good.
I guess. I mean, when do we build each other up?
Just go with it. Just act like we do.
Yes, we are supportive friend people.
They're supposed to be thinking like, oh, that's nice that they do that off camera. Well, now they know that we don't. Way to go, Brian. You peeled back the curtain all the way. All right, well, let's get into stupid trivia. All right, so last week we had our guest Mike on, and he gave us some good trivia because we talked one of the characters we had when we were doing our protagonists as Hawkeye from MASH. So he gave some good trivia about MASH, and that was a question that which character was a different actor in the pilot and then changed to the actor that we know and love after the pilot. And that was Father Mulcahy. He was played by George Morgan in the first episode, then switched to William Christopher when they realized they needed someone who had a little bit more comedic timing, a little quirkier, instead of being maybe as despondent as he was.
Nice. And then I have a trivia in mind, unless you have got one.
Nope, go for it.
Okay, so the one that we accidentally forgot about, or I accidentally forgot about, Bill Lawrence. He actually, on two of his shows, I don't think all three, but at least two of his shows, cast his wife in a pretty prominent role. So who is Bill Lawrence's celebrity wife?
That's interesting. Well, I will think about it, and I will tell him off camera when we're going to also spend time encouraging each other because of how good of friends we are, because that's something we do.
Absolutely.
Come on, sell it better.
Yes, Matt is. I mean, I think most of our listeners know us, and they know that we actually are friends. Like,
yeah, absolutely. It's like, I wouldn't make fun of you like this if I didn't like you. I'm a nice enough person that if like I really made fun of someone this way and I felt that way, I would just feel so bad about myself for until I apologized.
It's like, if you make those kind of jokes, like you have to realize, think about, like, they know I'm joking, right? Like,
it was Terrence I called. I recorded a Movies on Monday last night, and I thought it was you, but it's like, Terrence asked me, "Hey, are you ready?" I'm like, I've been waiting on you, loser. Like that's how I responded to him or something like that. And when I sent him, like, that was through text. He knows I'm kidding, but even that is a little harsh if he doesn't use the tone that he knows that I have. So,
Oh yeah, that stuff over text is hard. You ever seen that
Yeah.
Key and Peele sketch where they're texting each other and Jordan Peele thinks they're super mellow and like, oh man, that's awesome. And then Keegan Michael Key is reading it like super passive aggressive, like, what are you talking? Oh my gosh! Like, he thought they were talking about fighting. He was like, you want to go? You want to go? And the guy was like, want to go? I can go hang out. Yeah, sure. It's like how they were completely misreading the situation.
That's good. That's a good idea. I haven't seen that, but that's a funny concept.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of funny concepts, make sure you are here next week for our live event. So it'll be next week, March 17th. What better way to spend St. Patrick's Day than hanging out with us at 8:15 p.m. Central Time. I know that a lot of our listeners are people that don't drink. If you do drink, whatever, that's fine. Go on to the bar. Watch it from the bar. Have fun. Next week, March 17th, 8:15 p.m. Central Time. Be there or be not there. Those are your options.
All right.
Until next time, I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And we're reminding you to stay tuned and keep watching. It is going to be on Thursday night, March 11th. Wait, no, March 18th. Sorry. Dates are really hard, guys. It'll be Thursday, March 18th.
Well, okay. We have to read that. March 18th is Friday. March 17th is Thursday, and it's not next week. Are we 2 weeks away from recording?
It's 2 weeks from recording.
Okay, yeah, but yeah, it's March 17th is Thursday.
Well, we're doing St. Pat. All right. Well, whatever. Okay. Just so you guys know, completely butchered it my first couple times. Hope this stays in because I got it right and I did it and it's great.
I think what I'll do is that last little bit where you're joking around saying, keep this part in, that I'm make that part the end tag after the end music. But when we're actually announcing it, I'm just going to have it straight, like with the right dates. I'm going to cut out the wrong dates and all that stuff.
Perfect.